The dairy industry has been subject to much scrutiny throughout the past several years. Because of the rise of social media, PETA, and the vegan movement, a lot of misinformation has been received by consumers who, if they've never been to a dairy farm themselves, might take it as the truth. However, many practices that are perceived as cruel are actually done for animal welfare. Yes, you heard that right. The methods that animal rights activists are complaining about are actually done to keep animals happy and healthy. What a lot of people don't realize is that if animals actually lived in conditions that caused chronic stress, they would not be productive. Consequences of cruelty in dairy cattle include decreased milk production, higher susceptibility to disease, dangerous behavior, and, if severe enough, even infertility, no milk for the rest of that animal's lives. When dairy cattle get diseases, the medicines used to cure them will leave residues in the milk, and so that milk has to be discarded, meaning the farmer loses money. All of these would actually cut into the dairy farmer's profits. This is a stark contrast from the vegan belief that farmers are negligent in their attempts to crank out as much milk as possible, just to turn a buck. The truth is that it literally pays to be nice to animals. The first and foremost thing for people to realize is that the beef cattle industry and the dairy cattle industry are completely separate. Beef breeds are very different from dairy breeds and have very different characteristics that make them suitable for their respective purposes. Although figures suggest that 1 in 5 cattle at slaughter actually do come from dairy farms, dairy cattle are genetically designed to put their energy into milk production. For this reason, they do not have much meat, and farmers rarely make a profit off of their slaughter. In this video, I will be explaining the welfare benefits of the following practices: artificial insemination, separating mothers and calves, what happens to male calves, tail docking, and dehorning. If one of these topics is of particular interest to you, then you can scroll ahead to the times listed beside them so you don't have to sit through the entire video. However, it is important to note that each of these plays an important role in the welfare of dairy animals. Just like in all my videos, I will have links below to articles that have further information and cite all of my sources so you can fact check me. I encourage you to take the time to review the research for yourself. Many would respond to this video by saying that we shouldn't even be consuming dairy at all, and thus we wouldn't need to take these precautions in the first place. To this, I'll respond with a promise that an upcoming video will cover the health benefits of dairy, and also food safety, including why contaminants like pus or antibiotics are not in our milk. But for now, let's get into the video. Part 1. Artificial Insemination. The vegan movement claims that artificial insemination in livestock is comparable to rape because, in their minds, it's happening against the animal's will. However, relationships in cattle are not as complex as relationships in humans. For cattle, there is no emotional connection between a cow and a bull, and intercourse is simply a result of instincts, not free will. In the wild, or under natural, unhindered conditions, cows naturally give birth annually. This is not an effect of human intervention. If a female bovine goes too long without breeding, she will become infertile. This means it would actually be more unnatural and inhumane not to breed cattle at all, and it shows the importance of farmers promoting regular pregnancy to encourage the animal's natural cycles. So what is artificial insemination? In livestock, semen is taken from a bull and implanted into a cow using specialized equipment. The technique is fairly complicated, and so there are many classes and certification programs that professionals undergo to be able to inseminate on a large scale. One of the key elements in the process is timing. Producers must detect cycle markers in the cattle and act accordingly within a very narrow time window. With innovations in this practice and many technological advances, semen is now being shipped overseas. New breeds have been developed or improved upon, and AI, as it's commonly called, is a commonplace practice throughout the agricultural industry. In fact, in the US, 66% of dairy cows are bred using AI. In many European countries such as Holland and England, this is 90%. AI is used in beef cattle, swine, sheep, goats, and more. But why do livestock raisers artificially inseminate instead of just turning them out on a pasture and allowing them to breed naturally? There are many reasons that are a direct benefit to the farmer, such as genetic innovations, controlling the timing of calf crops, removing the risks of having to keep a bull on site, and it being less expensive. But more importantly, AI is actually the option that causes the least stress to the cows. Here are a few reasons why. prevents injuries to animals that can occur from natural breeding. Bulls can weigh over 1,500 pounds more than females. Allows farmers to keep cows indoors and out of harsh conditions. Avoids the spread of sexually transmitted infections. Improves hygiene, reducing other types of diseases and improving barn air quality. Gets animals used to handlers to make them more comfortable during milking. Enables farmers to maintain regular contact with their animals to treat diseases quicker. Part 2. Separating mothers and calves. Animal rights activists get up in arms when they learn that baby calves are taken from their mothers. They believe it's a traumatic experience for the animals and that it's done only to steal the mother's milk. Neither of these things is true. Weaning calves early is actually for their own well-being. Although the separation may be distressing for some others, this does not last for a long time, 1 or 2 days at most. The connection between mother and calf is not the same as the bond between a human mother and child. Here's a few reasons why the separation is better for the calves. If the calf was left outside, there would be an upset and chaos up to 3 times a day when the pair was separated for the mother to be milked. Calves would get plowed over and shoved aside by fully grown cattle when it came time to head into the barn. Calves would not be able to get nutrition suitable to their age, and fresh water would be difficult to obtain because they would be competing with the bigger cows for space at water troughs. By putting each calf in its own hut, workers can keep an eye on their health, how much they're eating and drinking, growth rates, and be able to give each calf one-on-one attention. At many dairy farms, there are certain workers that do nothing but take care of the babies. After all, the calves are the farmer's future milkers, and if they really lived the miserable lives that the vegan proponents claim, their growth and future production would be stunted. Weaning is a natural process that even happens in the wild. In beef cattle operations, calves are usually weaned at 5 to 7 months of age, the time when the males reach sexual maturity. Failure to wean puts the herd at risk for inbreeding or male calves breeding the heifers too young. Another important note, colostrum, or the mother's first milk that supplies the baby with key developmental nutrients, is not consumable by humans and is still fed to the baby. Even after the colostrum phases into milk that is drinkable by humans, milk is still set aside for the calves to have. Part 3. What happens to male calves? If there's one issue in agriculture that vegans have correctly identified, it's that we can't get milk from bulls. At least, not milk humans want to drink. The reality is that male calves are a byproduct of the dairy industry, causing farmers to look for alternative uses for them, and even processes that will do away with them completely. Concerned consumers have voiced opposition to all of these options, some of them justified, some of them not. So what does happen to bull calves in dairy operations, and what red flags should grocery shoppers be on the watch for? Veal is the meat of a bull aged 6 months to a year old. Bob veal, a specialty product, is harvested at 3 weeks old. At this stage in development, the calf is no way comparable to a human baby. Cattle progress at a much faster rate than people do. They can walk and communicate hours after birth. At 6 months old, they are already ready to breed. After 1 year, the calf's meat is called beef. Just like any other livestock species, if calves were handled in such a way that caused chronic stress, they would not be productive. If these calves suffered, they wouldn't put on as much weight, cutting into the veal farmers' yields and thus their profits. At the end of the day, despite the facts, if you're still against the veal industry, then there's more good news. New technology is allowing farmers to never even let a male calf be born. The success rate for this varies, but the idea is to decrease the amount of males born so that there will ultimately be more females in production and less bulls that would end up as veal. How? When the semen is harvested for use in artificial insemination, it can be evaluated to see if the progeny would be male or female. Then, only the female-producing sperm is kept to be implanted into cows. Part 4. Tail docking. Tail docking is the removal of the bottom part of the tail. To vegan activists, this often gets portrayed as a very bloody and painful operation, but that is not the case. Removing the tail is done a lot like a human surgery would happen. The calves are usually put under and stitched back up before any real blood loss or pain occurs. Even if the calves are not put under, there is still pain relievers or disinfectants such as iodine involved. But why go through all this trouble? Dairy farmers dock tails because it helps prevent disease. At the end of the cow's tail, there are several long, coarse hairs that make up a switch that is used to swat flies. However, This switch catches manure and gets in the way of the milking machines because it hangs right behind the udder. By removing the bottom part of the tail, there is no longer anything there to catch contaminants or get pulled by the equipment. This process promotes health for the entire herd and avoids sanitation hazards for the milk. Part 5. Dehorning. Dehorning is very similar in that it is made out to be cruel and gruesome, but is actually done for the cattle's well-being. Dehorning is done at a very early age, often as soon as days after birth. At this stage, the horn hasn't fully developed its roots into the skull yet and can be removed easily. The longer the farmer waits, the more involved the procedure becomes because the horn's connective tissues attach to the skull. Before 2 months of age is the standard time to remove this free-floating horn, and at this point, removal is called disbudding. Disbudding can be done using a product called caustic paste, which applies a tin film of calcium and sodium hydroxide that chemically burns the horn-producing cells. When done properly, this should cause no pain to the calves at all. Some farmers have reported that their calves will actually sleep through the procedure. Another method of disbudding is using a hot iron to remove the horn tissue, and this is quite a bit more painful. Sedation or use of anesthesia is common in these instances. One advantage of hot iron disbudding over caustic paste is that it's a much quicker procedure. Calves have to be kept indoors and away from other animals for at least 6 hours after the paste has been applied to avoid smearing. However, after 20 seconds of heat, the calf is good to go with a hot iron. Yet another alternative is to physically remove the horn bud. This can be done with a knife or scoop. I once visited with a dairy farmer who simply twisted the horn buds off with his hands. How effective this was at preventing horn growth later in life, I'm not sure, but he seemed happy with his technique. After 2 months of age, the horn has connected to the skull and the removal is called dishorning. This is generally avoided because the process exposes the sinus cavities, releases a lot of blood, and has a higher chance of infection. If dehorning is necessary, coagulants or cauterization should be used to reduce blood loss. Putting animals under is very common, although not necessary in all cases. But why do breeders insist on this controversial practice? Having horns later in life is a huge risk for injury to other animals and workers. Being milked 3 times a day means that cattle are constantly on the move and pass frequently through narrow alleyways together. One wrong move and a horn could make a serious puncture that would lead to much more distress than dehorning does. 20 seconds of pain during infancy avoids major harm in adulthood. Part 6. How animal rights activists are hurting animals. Unfortunately, many animal rights activists have put pressure on dairy farmers, causing them to quit each of these practices, thus presenting animal welfare hazards unknowingly. In many parts of the world, these methods have been outlawed, causing them to become obsolete. Norway, Sweden, Finland, Switzerland, Germany, Luxembourg, and Australia have all banned tail docking. An outright ban of dehorning is very rare, but most developed nations do have mandates as to how it should be carried out. One of the biggest consumer complaints the American Veal Association, or AVA, has received is that calves are raised in confinement. Producers have no choice but to meet the desires of the consumers rather than doing what's necessarily best for animals, even with the understanding that consumers don't comprehend the farmer's intentions. For this reason, the AVA called for all veal producers to switch to group housing by the end of 2017, meaning that calves are now surrounded by other calves from day one. Although this will allow the calves to act on their natural, curious, and social nature, the conditions involve less sanitation, less sanitized care, and less attention to any problems that commonly arise during these crucial first weeks. Many dairies do eventually put their heifer calves into group housing, but this is usually not until they're a few months old and have gotten the advantage of individual care. Government mandates concerning farm animal welfare are too often based on the pressures of animal welfare advocates who do not understand farming practices, and legislatures do not take the time to get input from concerned farmers who are experienced with cattle and livestock's needs. Basically, people who know nothing about what farm animals need are the ones deciding how they're cared for. The main point I'm trying to express here is that consumers need to understand that farmers have a purpose behind their methods, and very often that purpose is for the animal's benefit. If you're having some doubts about the information I provided, head on over to the links in the description to see my sources. Thank you very much for watching to the end of this video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Bye!